84 dead, 10 of them children, some 50 others in critical condition, a reinforced state of emergency, a city and a nation once again in shock. We're looking at images from in Nice, where earlier on Thursday evening, a truck rammed through the crowd at the Bastille Day fireworks display. It was stopped in a hail of bullets. Welcome to a special edition of The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey joins us from the Riviera Resort of Nice. Thank you for being with us. We want to thank as well Paris correspondent Aaron Zaleski of the Daily Beast, Judah Grunstein, editor-in-chief of World Politics Review, and France 24 chief international affairs editor Robert Parsons. Bastille Day fireworks on the famed Promenade des Anglais seaside is a tradition that any Nice native has attended dozens of times. The images and the stories are harrowing.
The image I can't shake is the truck passing in slow motion, like a train, you know, plowing through a ton of people.
My 7-year-old son said, "Look, Mom, there are more firecrackers." And really, it was the truck that was... It was really very upsetting. You could see people screaming, telling us, "Leave, leave." We didn't get it. I still have the images of people screaming, crying children.
Christopher Dickey, what's particularly harrowing when you hear those eyewitness accounts, of course, is children. Earlier, the local newspaper Nice Matin reporting that 54 of them were in hospital, 10 of them are dead.
Oh, look, the whole thing was just more horrible than one can imagine. I mean, you have to think what it's like when a fireworks display is ending, when there are thousands of people who've been watching it, they've been having a good time, they're about to go back to their homes or to restaurants or to bars and continue to have a good time, and then all of a sudden, for no reason that they can imagine, they are dying, and their children are dying, and men, women, and children, all innocents, are being mowed down by one man in a heavyweight refrigerator truck who's decided, for whatever reasons, that he's going to take vengeance on the world by slaughtering as many people as he can at an event like this.
What have people been telling you?
Well, they've been telling us that they really can't understand why he did it. And Dana Kennedy, one of my colleagues, has been interviewing people in the Muslim neighborhoods here. She's done a lot of work in the Muslim neighborhoods over the years, and they are absolutely appalled. They're saying we have to speak out, we have to do more. They're launching a blood drive. They're going to be giving a lot of blood tomorrow for people who are still in the hospital. And they say that this guy was just a violent, tempered, petty criminal. And they don't think that he was connected with any Islamist group. They think that he was really a one-man show, a lone wolf, if you will, or what the counterterror expert Brian Jenkins calls a stray dog, just one of those lost people who tries to go out in a blaze of glory with an act of horrible violence.
Judah Grunstein.
What Christopher said is really true, especially in this situation now where we don't have a lot of details, for instance, from his computer or his cell phone or his travel, for instance. But for now, he seems to be one of these ambiguous profiles where it's very hard to say whether this is, for instance, a failure of intelligence or security, or whether it is just a free electron or a stray dog that just snaps. The problem obviously is that the result is the same in terms of the human loss and in terms of the trauma. The question is, what sense do we make of it, and what lessons do we learn from it in terms of trying to prevent something like this from happening again? The problem with this kind of case, again, in the absence of any more information that leads us to believe that this was either carried out in order to fulfill some sort of allegiance to a foreign terrorist group or at the direction of one, is that it's impossible to stop every act of violence, and that in the current climate, it seems to be until proven otherwise, everything is assumed to be related to the terrorist threat.
And as we speak, there's a mass taking place in Nice to honor the memory of the victims. Aaron Zaleski, when you've covered the Charlie Hebdo attacks, when you've covered the attacks of last November where 90 were killed, it looks very possible that this time that death toll is going to go higher. What's your feeling this morning?
It does. Well, the basic climate in Paris is, of course, it's one of shock and disbelief and sadness. And then I also noticed there's a heaviness this time. There's a weariness almost. Here we go again. When is it going to end? Is it going to end? And what struck me the most is, compared to the Paris attacks back in November that were quite sophisticated, there were multiple people involved, multiple operatives, explosives, they'd been well planned. This was a very crude attack. This was one person, as far as we know, in a van. He had some weapons on him, but there were no sophisticated explosives. And even that being so, he was able to do almost as much damage in terms of loss of life as this more sophisticated attack in Paris. And I think that's really hitting home too.
Rob Parsons?
Well, I think this is one of the big questions. Fraçois Hollande said just yesterday that he was about to end the state of emergency in France. Yet under that same state of emergency, this incident happened. He's now extended it by a further 3 months. It has to be questioned, really, whether the sort of measures that the French government or any government will probably be taking in these circumstances are really the answer to this sort of problem. Is any state using traditional measures going to cope with this? The answer, presumably, has to be better intelligence. The French authorities have been looking at their own failures over the last few months. They came up with a report just very recently in which they've addressed those problems and called for consolidation, a complete overhaul of their intelligence agencies, of which there were too many in the past up until now. Maybe that's the answer, because it's really difficult to see that if this guy is just the stray dog that we've been talking about, how you actually defend yourself against that. If he doesn't have a bleep on the intelligence service screens, how do you track him down? He was known to the police, but not to the intelligence service. He was just a common criminal with a grudge. And perhaps inspired by the Islamic State organization's call to use whatever means possible to kill as many people as possible.
My understanding, again, this is all very sketchy, is that he wasn't even really a common criminal. He had a criminal record. So in other words, this is a guy with regular employment who at one time had a run-in with the law and maybe did some time.
The last time it was an altercation with a motorist back in January. He was convicted in March for that.
Right. So, but it's not someone who's breaking and entering or robbing banks. It's not a street criminal. Yeah. It's a violent person. Again, the biggest challenge along the lines of what you're talking about is that, and I mentioned this to Aaron downstairs before the show, the hardest thing about taking human life in cold blood is the decision to do so. After that, there's no shortage of means or methods to do it, and the state just simply cannot prevent all of them. That's impossible.
Christopher Dickey, this is something we've talked about, alas, too many times. The profile of the suspect, a Tunisian national, 31 years of age. Your thoughts?
Robert, there's a 4-second delay, I think.
Well, I think we don't know what demons drove this guy. People in his community are saying that he was in the middle of a messy divorce. A lot of people get depressed and angry. He had an angry personality, clearly. He was beating a guy with a piece of wood. That was the violent incident. He's a troubled person. Okay, fine. A lot of terrorists are troubled persons. If we look at the question of intelligence and how intelligence can be used to try and stop this kind of attack, I think we want to focus probably on the guns. I think one of the things that we've seen with a lot of these terrorist incidents, going back to Charlie Hebdo, is that these guys are hooked into clandestine arms networks. Koulibaly, the guy who attacked the kosher supermarket in January of 2015, he was very much involved with acquiring weapons, acquiring Kalashnikovs. This guy had 2 automatic pistols. If he was just a loser, just a violent guy, where did he get those? Who did he connect with to get those? Now, there is a lot of
that undermines what you were saying earlier, that he cannot be.
Maybe it's not that hard to do it.
In other words, he can't be a stray dog if he's got the connections to get those guns.
Well, you can. I'm saying we don't know. I'm saying he could be a stray dog. He could be a stray dog who got guns, or he could be part of a bigger organization. I think we can't dismiss the idea right out of hand that he is a stray dog who just managed to get guns. And that's the thing. If you want to focus on people who are dangerous, you focus on the guns. That's one of the things that the intelligence services can do a hell of a lot better than they've been doing. Hell, we don't do a very good job of it in the United States, but in France, you can't just go into the corner store and buy guns the way you can in some states in the United States.
And to Robert Parsons' point, Christopher, about how there have been intelligence failures, a lot of them. We know that the president himself, when he was down where you are in Nice earlier, got copiously booed by the locals. Is there a big fail?
Look, I mean, I don't know which is worse. A guy like this who was never on the radar as a terrorist, or guys like the ones involved with Charlie Hebdo, the kosher supermarket, the November 13th attacks in Brussels, who were very much on the radar and then just got lost in the system, somehow ducked beneath the radar and weren't tracked anymore. Or, for instance, the man who killed the policeman and his wife in front of their 3-year-old kid just a month ago. All those people were on the radar, and somehow the intelligence services and the police didn't stop them from doing what they did. This guy wasn't even on the radar. So where does that leave us? It leaves us very worried is where it leaves us.
All right, when he spoke earlier, the French president blasted the cruelty of an individual and perhaps of a group. Those are the words of Fraçois Hollande, adding, we're in for a fight that's going to be long. The initial statement by the president just after Thursday night's attack was reminiscent of the one he made back in November when in Paris he said France was at war.
France has been attacked as it celebrates the 14th of July, a national holiday that symbolizes freedom, because human rights are refuted by fanatics, and France is clearly a target. After the events of January 2015 and of last November in Paris and Saint-Denis, Nice has now been targeted. It is the whole of France that is under threat from Islamist terrorism.
Under threat from Islamist terrorism, yet neighbors say he didn't really complete his Ramadan fast.
And I think that this really highlights a problem that we have, because the only tools that we can fight this threat with are the tools of reason, the tools of trying to think through, trying to explain why did this person do this, who did it, who is he connected to, what drove him to do it, what started the process of radicalization, how does that process work, was there a process of radicalization? So all we can do is try to explain, come up with coherent narratives that do that, and then apply reason to try and figure out policy.
Was that the right language to use on the part of Fraçois Hollande?
Well, let me just finish this thought, and I think it will lead to the answer. I think there's a huge element of non-rational factors that drive someone to do something like this that can just never be explained, possibly. And that even someone who claims allegiance to one of these groups might not really know what they're doing, and might do it after the fact, might do it during the fact, might believe that they're doing it for that, but has never really spent time doing it. This wasn't the case, for instance, with the Charlie Hebdo attacks or the November attacks or the Brussels attacks, But in a case like this, where there's this ambiguous profile, I think that it's possibly premature to jump to the conclusion that President Hollande did.
So why did he do it?
That I can't answer. I think that there's a real pressure to act, there's a real pressure to explain, and there's a real pressure to show that you have the problem at hand. But I think that everything that we're talking about, whether it's Christopher saying there's a problem that this guy wasn't on the radar, or should he even have been, Rob saying what can we do to stop it even if he had been, we really have to confront the limits of what we can actually prevent, and what we can explain and what we can prevent. We might not be able to explain much, and we certainly can't prevent everything.
Rob Parsons?
No, I agree absolutely. I think Fraçois Hollande is under immense pressure. He's not a popular president. He feels powerless in the face of this threat, but he has to reassure his people that he's doing something. The problem is that threat is so amorphous, but it's easier for him to give the impression that it's something concrete that can be dealt with. Because if he goes to the French people and says, look, we don't know where this threat is coming from, we're doing our best to track it down and keep it under control, but we can't really promise you anything, the reception he's going to get is going to be awful. So he's forced to try and concretize that threat.
Forced to concretize that threat. We know Barack Obama, though, shies away from using the words Islamist terrorism. He's been criticized for it in the U.S. Is François Hollande doing it? Let's cut to the chase here. Is he doing it to chase after the votes of those who might opt for the far-right National Front?
I don't know, but perhaps. He really is in an extremely difficult position at the moment, for the reasons I've just outlined. He's damned if he does, and he's damned if he doesn't. That's the problem for him at the moment. And obviously, electioneering comes into the equation. He's a politician, after all, and he's thinking about next year's elections. But he is faced with a genuine problem that it's faced it's not a problem that's just faced in France either. The attacks are concentrating in France at the moment, but they've happened in Spain, they've happened in Belgium, they've happened in UK. They could happen anywhere.
Aaron Zaleski?
I think one of a possible reason for that language is that this came on the heels of other attacks quite recently that had been linked to Islamist terrorism. The Brussels attack, the attack on the airport in Istanbul, the attack on the cafe in Bangladesh. So it seems as if there's this global pattern, and I think that it's people's immediate, a lot of people just jump to that conclusion because it seems like this is part of a larger global threat.
If I may, I'd avoid reading too much or drawing too much of a parallel between the French political context, especially when it comes to talking about religion, and the American political context. The American political context with regard to religion is multicultural. It's an approach that embraces the variety of identity when it comes to religion, whereas the French identity is primary, and religion is less of a taboo of a subject for a French politician to speak about. Having said that, Rob's absolutely right. What I said about the limits of what we can explain and what we can prevent, no politician in their right mind can actually say that, especially the president of the nation in the address in the aftermath of the attack, unless they no longer really feel like serving in office.
I think the thing that we should all be worried about is that François Hollande and any other leaders in Europe will be tripped by incidents like these into curtailing our civil liberties. And there is a suspicious trend of that going on. The fact that he's reintroduced so quickly the state of emergency, I find alarming.
Including searches without warrants.
Including searches without warrants. And these sort of threats that he made to use more force to go after the Islamic State organization in Syria with more strikes, it's a little bit too populist for my liking. And I think he should be a little bit more considered about the strategies he's coming up with and suggesting before coming out with statements like that.
Do you agree, Christopher Dickey?
I think there's a great danger in a situation like this, not only for politicians but for a nation, in appearing impotent, in appearing indecisive. It doesn't even have to be the right decision, but a decision has to be taken and a demonstration has to be made of some sort of action. Now that can be dangerous. Sometimes you should say to people, don't just do something, stand there and wait things out and be patient. But the public in a situation like that is not going to want that. And I think that one action, the military action that Hollande is undertaking now, doesn't preclude the other actions that need to be taken on the intelligence front and perhaps some curtailment of civil liberties. The problem is none of it seems to be doing much good, and there's always the risk that it will play right into the strategy of al-Qaeda and the strategy of the so-called Islamic State. What is that? What do they really want? It's all very well documented. They're very explicit about it. To the extent that they carry out actions in Europe, they want to provoke a civil war. And what is the best target for that? France, because it has the largest Muslim and Arab population in Europe. So their idea, doesn't mean they can do it, but their idea is that if they keep pushing, they will turn people against each other. And there are plenty of politicians who will play into that game.
We're going to pick up on that when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching a special edition of The World This Week.